Okay, this is English Literature Specification B Aspects of Narrative paper, in which you have 2 hours to answer 3 questions. We're going to just walk through the paper and have a look at common errors that candidates make and how you can improve your performance. In section A, you need to choose one text from this section and answer both parts of the question. 1 hour on this section, so that's 30 minutes per part of the question. First of all, you need to look at the fact that there are a number of questions on this paper, a number of texts on this paper, and you've not necessarily studied those. So first thing, seems very obvious, but find the questions from the text that you've been studying. So there's one of ours, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Write about the ways Coleridge tells the story in part 3, and Coleridge described his poem as a work of pure imagination. To what extent do you agree with this assessment of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner? And you should be starting to think about whether or not you think you might be able to attack that question. Lamia, the Eve St Agnes, La Belle dans son Merci, Keats's work. How does Keats tell the story in lines 350 to 397 of Lamia? And what do you think of the view that secrets are central to the narratives of Keats's poetry? Then the next text that's ours is The Road, Cormac McCarthy. That's right about some of the ways McCarthy tells the story from the top of page 56 to the bottom of page 81. Make sure if you're planning to answer that in section A that you have the Picador 2009 edition, because that's the one that they're going to use the page references from. How do you respond to the view that the story in The Road is weakened because so much of the character's history is untold? And then our fourth text from this paper in this centre is The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald's text. Write about some of the ways Fitzgerald tells the story in chapter 2, and how do you respond to the view that it's very difficult for readers to feel anything other than contempt for Tom Buchanan. So the first thing that I think you need to do on this paper is to go through and to find your 4 texts. Most of you have been set up in terms of the teaching of this course to take on Gatsby in section A. That's because the weighting of teaching time has been prioritised in favour of Gatsby. So that may be the text you feel you know best. Not necessarily. The teaching of aspects of narrative has been the same across the course, and that means that you may well be intending to answer on Keats, Coleridge, or Cormac McCarthy in section A, and actually use Gatsby as a section B text. I would advise that once you've looked through section A, you do quickly check in section B and make sure that the 3 texts that you're not going to do in section A work for you in section B, because this question is worth as much as both questions in section A put together. This is 2 questions, you need to answer 1. And you must not repeat the text that you've used in section A. And you get 1 hour to answer this section. January's questions were: writers draw upon the conventions of different genres when constructing their narratives. And then you're given some examples. Write about the significance of generic conventions in the narratives of 3 writers studied. And a key choice writers make is how they name or refer to characters in stories. Write about the significance of the choices writers have made in naming or referring to their characters in the 3 texts you have studied. You need to look at those questions and make a choice, fixing in some possible ideas fairly swiftly about the 3 texts that you have not used or decided that you might not use in section A. It may even change your opinion about which text to write on. So, for example, the majority of you are probably going to look at The Great Gatsby in section A, but you may look at that question and draw a complete blank on Tom Buchanan's character, for example, or feel that chapter 2 was a weakness, something you weren't keen on. And you might look back and think that actually, if you go back to the Keats, okay, that actually you're much better with some of the poetry there. I'm going to model through for you an approach for section A odd questions, these first ones, and just talk you through what you might want to do with this exam question. It applies to any text that you will study: Keats, Coleridge, McCarthy, or Fitzgerald. Okay, So we're talking about section A, odd questions. Now these questions always ask the same sort of thing. They're asking us to talk about how. Okay, now that means what narrative methods. All right, that's our aspects of narratives, that's the authorial methods, okay, that the author, who's always named in the questions, uses to tell their story. Okay, so those are our real key words. How, via what methods, does the author tell the story? Okay, and the first thing that I advise candidates to do here is start by pinning down this story. This, after all, is the title of the paper, Aspects of Narrative. So start by pinning down this story. So, for example, in lines 350 to 397 of Lamia, Keats introduces Corinth and its residents. They're talking about Lamia and Lysias, and as they talk, I'm thinking that voices and speakers is quite important in this section of the poem. Lamia and Lysias then encounter Apollonius, and Lamia's fear of him is absolutely clear, and this doesn't bode well. The section that's specified here ends with the portal to Lycia and Lamia's sanctuary being described. Okay, what I've done there is I really have told the story of the section that has been specified here. Okay, lines 350 to 397 of Lamia. And what that does for me, in my head, is it stops that adrenaline and panic that sets in at the beginning of an exam. It means that I'm really focused on the aspect that I'm being asked to examine in this question. I'm really honing in on it. And in terms of, from an examiner's point of view, in a few sentences, they've seen that this candidate understands the story and that everything else I say is going to come from that story. So first thing, start by pinning down the story. Once you've pinned down the story, you will find that naturally the key authorial methods become clear. So, for example, I talked about how this story, this part of this poem, introduces Corinth and its residents, and at the end ends with the description to the portal to their hideaway being described. So I think place and setting is going to be a key aspect of narrative to examine. So I'm going to earmark that one, place and setting. As I said, next, Lamia and Lysias' voices, the voices of the residents of Corinth as they whisper, they're hushed in the way that they're talking about this couple. I think that's also an interesting part of this story and how Keats is using it. So I'm also going to earmark voices and speakers. And then I think we've also got Apollonius and his characterization. Okay, I'm not interested in the character of Apollonius. I'm thinking about how Keats constructs his character, so his characterization. So really that gives me place and setting, voices and speakers, and characterization, and I think that's a huge amount to cover in half an hour. And as an examiner, I'd be really happy with a candidate who tackled those fairly major aspects of narrative in their answer in half an hour. What that process that I've just talked you through also helps you do is not get bogged down with the language of that section. Okay, we can use language to support the points that we're going to make about place, voices, and characterization, but not as an end in itself. Okay, right. So, yeah. So it may help you to remember here what's being assessed. It's just the one assessment objective, which is AO2, which is form, language and structure. Okay, you don't need to worry about any of that. You just simply need to answer the question and do exactly as the question is telling you. Okay, but I'm just going to break down for you what that means for the examiners at the top end in bands 5 and 6. That means a candidate who is illustrating their arguments well from the text, and in fact excellent illustration for band 6. Okay, so who's going back to that text. Remember, it's an open book exam. okay, and you need to use it. Several points will be fully developed and analysed or evaluated, and that just means weighing those points up. And someone with a very good sense of writer constructing the story, okay, integrated evaluation of the story and authorial method. So linking, connecting all that you're going to say about setting and voices and characterization straight back to the story. Okay, now let's look at section A, even questions.